Hey everyone, welcome back to the Parenting Lab. I have been coaching parents for several years now and have conversations about parenting with almost everyone that I talk to. A lot of people don't know about parent coaching or what it is that I do, so naturally when we meet, they have a lot of questions. And while every family is different and every parent has really unique challenges, there are certain questions that I hear again and again. The details, of course, change, but for the most part, a lot of the issues are the same. It might be sleepless nights with a baby or a toddler who refuses to get dressed or potty train. Maybe it's a school-age child who doesn't want to do their homework without a fight, or a teenager who is barely talking to their parents anymore. Sometimes it's even parents of adult children who are dealing with new dynamics in their family and their identity. But underneath all of these specific struggles that really span a lifetime of stages and development, I have noticed that most of the questions parents bring me fall into one of three categories. One, how do I get my child to do something? Two, how do I stop myself from doing something? And three, how do I know if I'm doing any of this right? And those are the three questions I want to talk about today. Not because I have three simple answers that will suddenly make parenting easier. Gosh, I wish that it worked that way. But because sometimes the questions that we ask send us looking for the wrong kind of answer. We think we need a better consequence, the right words, another script, a new strategy. We want someone to tell us exactly what to do so we can finally feel confident that we're not getting it wrong. But these questions are rarely only about the situation in front of us that we're dealing with right now. Underneath them, we're usually looking for some sense of control, some hope that change is possible, or some reassurance that our children are going to be okay, that we are going to be okay. So I want to take them one at a time, not to give you the perfect answer, but to help you understand what you might really be asking and to find a more useful place to begin. And really, it's finding that more useful place to begin that's at the heart of what I do with parents. So question one, how do I get my child to fill in the blank? This is probably the question I hear the most often. How do I get my child to listen? How do I get them to stop arguing with me? How do I get them to do their homework, clean their room, tell the truth, take responsibility, put down their phone, talk to me? You could fill in that blank 100 different ways. Things you want your kids either to do or not to do. But they all begin with the same hope, and that is that there's something we can say or do that will produce the response we want from our child. And honestly, that makes sense. Parenting is huge and hard and comes with an enormous amount of responsibility. We're supposed to teach our children how to function in the world, but we're trying to do that with this other person who has their own personality and preferences and feelings, needs, agency, all the things. It can feel like we're responsible for the outcome without having full control over the process. So when a child isn't cooperating, our first instinct is often to look for a better strategy. Maybe we need a stronger consequence, a more consistent routine, a better reward system, or just the right combination of words. And sometimes a practical change really does help. Kids do need clear expectations, predictable boundaries, and guidance that makes sense for the age and stage they're in. I'm not suggesting that we stop teaching them or asking things of them, but there is a limit to what even the best strategy can do. We can't actually make another person listen, care, agree, calm down, tell the truth, or make good choices. For some reason, we seem to understand that about other adults, but we still feel like we can do it with our kids. Probably because in some ways, we can make those things more likely. We can teach the skills they need. We can make the expectation clear. We can hold a boundary and respond consistently, even when they choose to make a different choice. But we cannot reach inside another person, no matter how old they are, and control what they do. No matter how hard we try, how many books we read or scripts we memorize. That can be hard to accept because it leaves us feeling much more vulnerable than a new parenting technique does. A technique gives us something to try. Accepting the limits of our control means accepting that we can do a lot of things really well, and our child may still resist us. So when a parent asks me, How do I get my child to da da da? I often want to just shift the question. Instead of asking, how do I make this happen? Can we ask, what can I actually do here? What does my child need from me right now? And this is so important. Is the outcome more for me or more for them? Let's say your child won't do their homework. If the question is, how do I make them do it? You'll probably keep looking for more leverage, a bigger reward, a stronger consequence, a lecture about why school matters. But if you ask, what does my child need from me right now? Then the situation opens up a little bit. Maybe your job right now is to make the expectation clear. Maybe it's to help your child figure out why they're avoiding the work. Are they overwhelmed, confused, tired, hungry? Are they afraid of getting it wrong? Maybe they need help breaking the assignment into smaller pieces. Maybe they understand it perfectly. They're just simply choosing not to do it. And your job is to let a reasonable consequence follow without turning the whole night into a power struggle. The answer will depend a lot on the child and the situation. But do you hear the difference? One of those perspectives puts all of our energy into controlling the outcome. The other helps us identify our actual responsibility. What does my child need to learn? What support would help them learn it? What boundary is mine to hold, and what part of this belongs to them? So imagine what it would look like in any of the scenarios that parents bring to me most often. Could be sleeping, bedtime routines, potty training, screen time, curfew, communication. It's a huge shift, but it doesn't leave us powerless or without influence. It just helps us stop spending our power where it doesn't work so we can actually use it where it can. All right, so question 2. How do I stop myself from fill in the blank? Now, the second question shifts the focus from the child back onto the parent. How do I stop yelling? How do I stop giving in? How do I stop overreacting, lecturing, shutting down, taking my child's behavior so personally? Usually, by the time a parent is asking this question, they already know what they need to do differently. They've read the books, they've saved the posts, they've listened to the podcast even. They know they're supposed to stay calm, hold the boundary, validate feelings, respond instead of react, that pause that we're always talking about. The problem isn't that they don't know better. It's that knowing what to do and then being able to access that information in the moment are two very different things. You may know exactly how you want to respond, but in the moment you're tired. Your kid's asking the same question 6 times already. You're late. Someone's crying. Someone else can't find their shoes. And your body, your nervous system has decided that this now is an emergency. And suddenly all of those thoughtful, intentional parenting tools that you've learned, no. You cannot access those. And this is why I don't think, how do I stop, is the most helpful question. Because it treats the reaction like it's an isolated behavior that we should be able to eliminate if we just put in enough effort or have enough self-control. But our reactions have a context. They come from somewhere. Maybe you're running on little sleep. Maybe defiance is especially threatening to you because of how obedience was handled when you were growing up. Maybe you're carrying stress that has nothing to do with your child, but that interaction with them is where it finally spills over. Okay, maybe you're just asking yourself to respond calmly when you don't have that much capacity left. None of that excuses behavior that causes harm. We are still responsible for the way we speak to our kids, even when we don't feel resourced or have capacity for it. And we're still responsible for repairing when we do get it wrong. But responsibility and shame are not the same thing. Shame says, I should know better. What is wrong with me? Responsibility comes in when we stop beating ourselves up and get curious about what's going on. It happens when we ask, what keeps happening here, and what is this reaction actually trying to show me? What are you noticing in your body? What do you immediately tell yourself about your child's behavior? At what point are you losing access to the response that you wanted to have? Maybe the pattern begins when your child ignores the first request, but you don't say anything because you're trying to stay calm. And then they ignore the second request, but you still don't address it. By the fourth request, you're furious and yelling, and it feels like the yelling came out of nowhere, but it didn't come out of nowhere. There were earlier moments when you needed to speak more clearly. You needed to move closer, follow through, give them more information, or notice in yourself that frustration was building. That matters because it means the only opportunity for change isn't the final moment when you're already overwhelmed. You can work with the pattern earlier, but you have to recognize it first. You might decide that after one clear request, you'll stop repeating yourself from across the house and go help your child transition. You might practice one sentence you can use when you feel that lecture starting. You might notice that mornings are consistently where you're losing your patience and make the routine simpler before you ask yourself to be calmer inside of it. Sometimes the work is healing something deeper. Sometimes it is building a skill, and sometimes it's creating more support around predictable, hard moments. The goal here isn't to guarantee that you never yell or give in or shut down. The goal is recognizing the pattern sooner, to recover more quickly, and to make a different response more available to you over time. So maybe the question isn't only how do I stop doing this, whatever it might be. It might also be, what happens before I do this? And what would help me choose differently a little bit earlier? All right, question 3. How do I know if I'm doing this right? Now, this may be the subtlest of the 3 questions, but I think it sits underneath almost every parenting concern. Am I setting the right boundary? Am I being too strict? Not strict enough? Should I push more or step back? Should I say something? Should I let it go? Is this normal? Am I helping or am I making things worse? This is all about reassurance. We want reassurance because the stakes feel so high. These are our kids. The choices we make matter, and we know we won't always see the full impact of those choices until much later. The hard part is that parenting doesn't usually give us immediate proof that we've made the right decision. Holding a healthy boundary sometimes makes your child angry. Sometimes giving them appropriate space feels more like disconnection before it feels like independence. Sometimes you have a thoughtful conversation, but nothing changes right away. And sometimes you do make loving, intentional decisions, and your child still struggles. Their response in the moment is information, but it isn't always the final verdict on your parenting. A child being upset doesn't automatically mean that the boundary was wrong. A child being happy with you doesn't automatically mean the decision was a good one. If their reaction becomes our only measure, we can end up avoiding necessary rules and limits because we need their approval. Or we double down on something that isn't working because we're afraid that changing course means that we failed, or we don't want to seem wishy-washy or inconsistent. At the same time, I don't think the answer is to reassure ourselves that everything we do is fine because we're trying our best. Honestly, I think that's one of the biggest traps that parents get stuck in. Yes, our intentions matter, but they aren't the only thing that matters. We also need to pay attention to the impact our behavior has on our kids. We need to receive feedback and be willing to change when things aren't working. But being willing to change doesn't mean there's one perfectly right response. I'm in quotations. There's not one quote unquote right response that we are supposed to find. And that's where parenting gets super complicated. Maybe right is simply too rigid a standard for something as fluid as parenting. There isn't one correct response that works for every child at every age and in every situation. What your child needed from you 2 years ago is maybe not what they need today. And what works good with one child might completely miss the mark with the other one. So if there isn't one universally right response, and your child's immediate reaction can't tell you whether you've made a healthy choice, well, what do you look at instead? Well, you can ask whether you're being clear about what you're trying to teach. You can look at whether your response reflects the values you want to live. You can pay attention to patterns over time instead of judging the entire relationship by one hard moment. Is your child coming to you with hard things? Can they disagree with you without fearing you? Are your boundaries helping them build skills, or are they mostly helping you feel in control? When something goes wrong, are you willing to listen and repair and try a different approach? None of those questions will give you complete certainty, but they do give you something more useful than this demand to get every decision right. They give you a way to stay responsive. Good parenting doesn't mean always knowing the right thing to do. It means paying enough attention to notice when something needs to change and then being willing to change it. You're gonna get things wrong. Everybody does. But getting something wrong is not the same as permanently damaging the relationship. Children don't need parents who never screw up. They need parents who can recognize the screw up, take responsibility for it, and then find their way back. So maybe we need to stop asking, how do I know if I'm doing this right? And start considering, am I staying close enough to notice how this is affecting my child? And am I flexible enough to respond to what I'm learning? All right, now I know that for some of you, my answers to those 3 questions are going to actually seem more like non-answers. And you might be wondering, okay, if I can't tell you exactly how to make your child listen, and I can't guarantee that you'll never yell again, or confirm that every decision you're making is right, then what exactly is it that I do for parents? And that is a fair question. When parents come to me, it's usually not because they have no ideas or need more ideas. More often than not, they have too many already. They've read the books and saved the posts and tried a lot of different strategies, just like we've talked about, but they still don't know what applies to their child, what fits in their family, or why they can't seem to follow through on what they already know. And that really is where our work begins. We slow the situation down and look at what's actually happening, not just the behavior that brought them in, but what might be underneath it. We separate what belongs to the parent from what belongs to the child. We look at the parent's triggers, expectations, patterns, and capacity. And then we figure out what a clear, realistic, and values-aligned response could look like in their actual life. Sometimes that does mean leaving with some specific words to use, or a boundary to hold, or a practical tool or framework to try. And sometimes it means recognizing that the problem they thought they needed to solve isn't really the problem at all. And sometimes it means helping a parent understand why they keep getting pulled into the same reaction, even though they genuinely want to respond differently. I'm not there to hand parents a script and a promise that it will make their child cooperate. In fact, the first thing I tell everyone I talk to is that I'm not here for the kids. We actually don't talk about kids very much at all. I'm there to help them as the parent to see the situation more clearly, understand what is within their influence, and then choose a step they can actually carry into the relationship. And that may be the biggest value of coaching. You don't just leave with an answer for one difficult situation. We don't just solve one problem. You increase your capacity to understand what is happening and decide how you want to respond when the next difficult moment comes, and the next, and the next. On the surface, these 3 questions seem different. One is about our child's behavior, one is about our own behavior, and one is about whether the choices we're making are the right ones. But underneath them, I think we're often asking for control, change, and certainty. We want enough control to keep our children safe and guide them toward becoming the responsible, capable people that we want them to be. We want to believe that we really can change the patterns in ourselves that don't reflect the parent we want to be. And we want some certainty that our efforts are working, that our kids will be okay, and that we won't look back one day wishing we had done everything differently. And those are very normal, human, good things to want. But parenting has a way of asking us to keep showing up even without those guarantees. We teach something without knowing exactly when the lesson will take hold. We repair without being able to erase what happened. We hold a boundary our child might not understand or appreciate yet. We plant seeds we may not see grow for years or sometimes ever. That doesn't mean we stop looking for answers. There are skills to learn and tools that can help and practical changes that can make family life more peaceful and more connected. But a tool can't remove every difficult feeling. A strategy can't give us control over another person. And even the most thoughtful parenting cannot guarantee a particular outcome. What it can do is give us a direction. we can focus on our own behavior instead of trying to control our kids. We can understand our patterns instead of shaming ourselves for having them at all. And we can let our values, our child's needs, and the health of the relationship guide us when that certainty isn't available. If you came into this episode with your own version of one of these questions, I don't want you to leave feeling like the answer is just, you can't control your child, or you need to just work on yourself. There is so much more tenderness in these questions than that. You're trying to figure out how to guide someone you love when you can't make their choices for them. You're wondering whether you really can change the ways that you react. And underneath all of it, you may be asking whether what you're giving your child is enough. There won't always be a simple answer, but there is usually a next place to look. So ask yourself, what can I actually do here? What does my child need from me right now? What is my reaction trying to teach me? You won't always know exactly what to do. None of us do. But you can keep paying attention and make adjustments as your child grows and repair when you need to. Your parenting can't be reduced to one decision or one mistake. You're building relationships over time. Maybe doing it right isn't about finding the perfect answer to every parenting question. Maybe it looks more like staying curious and willing and continuing to find your way back to each other. If you would like help working through your own version of one of these questions, you can book a free 20-minute insight session where we will look at what's happening in your family and find a next step that actually fits. You can schedule that through the link in the show notes or online at theparentinglab.org. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I will see you all next week, where we'll continue to explore the art and science of parenting and put your parenting to the test. Take care.